pace of play is the same as that problem. And it's not surprising that you put engineers on this problem, and so it shouldn't be surprising that we're putting engineers at the USGA on this problem. What we've got here is a group of cars, and you've seen it. I've stuck in the Turnpike and the GSP every week. No different than I-5 here. Why is it that these collection of cars get stuck in traffic, but this collection of cars never get stuck in traffic? A train doesn't get stuck in traffic with itself, right? It flows right along. Well, I'm going to try to explain that to you, and then I'm going to try to relate that to how this analogy can help us understand pace and bring us to some of the solutions. I apologize, though. There's only one way to do that, and that's with a little bit of math. So I'm sorry, but there's no way around it. I can't get Rodney Dangerfield to take care of this problem. We need to do some math. Let's pretend this is our first group of the day, okay? And they tee off at 7 o'clock, and they finish at 11. Now, this is not difficult math here. Although I gave this talk last week, and somebody said the answer is 3. The answer is 4. So 11 o'clock minus 7 o'clock is 4. That's our first round of the day. Here's our second round of the day. They tee off at 7:10. And they finish at 11:12. Now, except for the first group of the day, I want you to stop thinking about what time did the second group tee off, what time did the second group finish. Instead, I want you to think about when did they, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself here. 11:12 they teed off, 11:12 they finished, 7:10 they teed off. That's a round time of 4 hours and 2 minutes. But I want you to stop thinking about when they teed off and when they finished. Instead, I want you to start thinking, when did they tee off relative to the group in front of them? 10 minutes after them. And when did they finish relative to the group in front of them? 12 minutes after. And so now what I can do is I can do a little jiggery-pokery with the math, and I can say, well, their round time is equal to 4 hours, which was how fast the group in front of them played, plus the 12-minute finishing interval, minus the 10-minute tee time interval. And lo and behold, I end up with the same 4 hours and 2 minutes, of course. But it's just a little bit different way of thinking about it. And now I can take that concrete example and I can turn that into an equation. And this is as heavy as it gets, so I apologize. And what it says is this. For group number I, their round time is equal to the round time of the group in front of them, plus the finishing interval minus the tee time interval. And that's very important. And what we call that finishing interval is our cycle time. You might recognize it if you're running tournaments. You might recognize it as a checkpoint time, for example. It's the same exact thing, and it's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to try to explain that a little bit further. So let's take a look at group number 2. We've got group number 2's round time is equal to group number 1's round time, plus their cycle time minus their tee time interval. And I can keep doing that. I can do group number 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now let's take a look at group number 3. Their round time is equal to the round time of the group in front of them, right? Group number 2, plus their cycle time minus their tee time interval. I'm going to keep saying this over and over again until it sinks into your subconscious. But I have an equation for group number 2. It's right here. So I can do what we call substitution, and we can plunk it in. Now look what just happened. Group number 3, their round time relies on group number 1. Plus the cycle time of group number 2 and their cycle time and the tee time interval. So I can keep doing that. Keep substituting here. Group number 5, group number 6. And then I can do one more thing. I can say these are my tee time intervals. Let's just assume, and it's a poor assumption as I've been learning in the data, but let's just assume that we have nice control over our tee time interval. Where our tee sheet matches exactly when we're sending groups out. Let's pretend that for a second. So I can collapse all those now into one simple equation here. And the simple equation is this. Group number 6 relies on group number 1. That's a very important thing to realize. Group number 1 is the locomotive in our train. If it doesn't move around the golf course quickly, then nobody behind them can move around the golf course quickly. It relies on the cycle times of group number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And for group number 6, it depends 5 times on the tee interval. So you can see right away that if I make a subtle change to my T interval, can make a big time difference to the rounds as they progress. I mean, think about group number 40. It's going to be 39 times the T time interval, the difference in the T time interval. So what does group 6 control here? They control one little bit of this equation. They don't control the first group's round time. They don't control the cycle time of all the groups in front of them, and they certainly don't control the T time. All they control is their own cycle time. And what is the cycle time again? It's that interval. When do they finish relative to the group in front of them? It's real easy to measure. You get a stopwatch, you measure group number 5, you click it on. When group number 6 finishes, you click it off. That's their cycle time. That's all they control. But if that's all they control, then why do we put these things out there on the golf course? Why do we put these things out there saying, hey, group number 6, you should be finishing in 4.5 hours? They don't have control of that. They only have control of when do they finish relative to the group in front of them. So that's what we should be telling them what to do. That's what we have to get in our brain to say, these are the important things. Not how long did group 6 take, how long did it take them to finish after the group in front of them. My wife works for DuPont. She's a process control expert. And I say to her, what if we ran a chemical factory with no measurements and no controls? She said, well, we'd be running in the streets in Delaware because the plant would be melting down. But we're running plants ourselves. We're running factories that produce rounds of golf. And so what we need to do is we need to measure and control the things that matter to pace of play. Just like in our house, if we want to have our house at 72 degrees, what do we need to do? We need to measure it, and we need to control it. It's no different. And so what the math is telling us is that if we want to control pace of play, if we want to have effective pace of play policies, we need to control the things that matter. So what are those things that matter? Well, everyone loves a three-legged stool, right? So I love a three-legged stool too. And it happens that the equations give us this three-legged stool. The three things that we have to measure and control to have effective control over pace is the round time of the first group, it's the cycle time between groups, and it's the T time interval. Those are the three things. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that are affecting group number 1's round time. There's a whole bunch of things that are affecting the cycle times. And I'm going to tell you more about how we're doing the research to figure out what those influences are. But until we start to wrap our heads around thinking about pace, not just in terms of how long did it take to play, but in terms of group number 1 as our locomotive, and then the cycle time between groups and our T times, we're not going to get control over pace. Again, I stress, the lead group is our locomotive. We have to be out there aggressively making sure that they're making their way around the golf course. Because if they're 10 minutes slower than they could be, and every other group behind them is, by definition, by the math, is 10 minutes slower than they could be. So we shouldn't just be setting group number 1's pace to be what we hope the average to be for the day. We should be setting it aggressively. There are golf courses out there, Big Troon, for example, incentivizes early groups to get around the golf course quicker than the average for the day. You can see that our cycle times are additive. If my cycle time is 10 minutes, then that's adding 10 minutes to my round. If it's 12 minutes, it's adding 12 minutes to my round. You can see that T times are subtractive. So a 12-minute interval is going to reduce pace 2 minutes more than a 10-minute interval, which in turn is 2 minutes better than an 8-minute interval. So what we've got there is a balance. What we have to have is a balance between our finishing intervals, our cycle times, and our T intervals. If we don't, if we're out of balance, then round times are going to climb. And you see that on a busy golf course. You see typically round times climb. That's because the T time interval and the cycle time are out of balance. So to achieve that balance, we have to, again, measure and control our cycle times and our T intervals. Here's an example of a golf course. These are actual rounds on a Saturday, not in New Jersey, fortunately. And you can see that that on this golf course, our early groups were able to get around in 4.5 hours, but by mid-afternoon, we were up over 5 hours and 45 minutes on this particular golf course. Now, how do we get this data? Fortunately, we've been lucky enough to team up with a major golf cart GPS company who have provided us with their entire archive of data, so that's been incredibly helpful. We get detail on every golf cart that goes around every golf course that they are a partner with. And we're also collecting our own data, and I'm going to talk about this more later. This is just a little GPS track that we are able to take on individual golfers. Here's one round. Here's a close-up. Here's a close-up of a bunch of golfers going around. So these are the two ways that we've been collecting this data. So we'll go back to our example here. Now, at this particular golf course, their golf cart GPS system says if you're taking more than 4.5 hours, you're behind pace. And you get these little alerts up on the screen saying, hey, you're going too slow. Well, on this particular day, everybody on the golf course practically got a message saying they're behind pace. Now, if you're telling everybody you're behind pace, you might as well tell nobody you're behind pace because it's just as effective. But if we look at this in a little more detail, if we look at this balance between cycle time and tee time interval, we start to learn a little more about some effective pace policies. This is a graph that shows the cycle times between the groups. And you can see that for the most part, they're green. Those are cycle times that would be perfectly acceptable, well within what we would hope to achieve. So even though 40 groups on the golf course were getting alerts that they were behind pace, really only over the whole day, only 8 groups were problematic. And in particular, I like to pick on group number 4, which is the one the biggest one on the left. If we look at their times as they're going through the golf course, and if you happen to have a GPS system at your golf course, you can see this. We can see that when they teed off, they were 9 minutes behind the group in front of them. By the first hole, they were 12 minutes, and by the second hole, they were 15 minutes behind the group in front of them. So by the second hole, we knew this group was a problem. By the end of the day, they were a half an hour behind the group in front of them. That's a half an hour that you can never recover from. And so an effective pace policy, as I said, needs to control this cycle time. We need to be on top of this particular group to get them into position. And there are steps that we can take to try to do that. Again, measuring and controlling. This is what it all comes back to. So if we had done that, if we had taken advantage of that measurement of controlling cycle time, with those 8 groups, just the 8 groups, not the whole golf course, not the whole 40 that were on it, but just those 8 groups, this is what would have happened to our round times. If we had brought the 20-minute intervals and the 30-minute cycle times down to just a reasonable 10 or 12, what we would have ended up with was a peak round on that day of 5 hours. Now that's not bad, but we can even do a little bit better. The data shows us just a little bit more. I can see that on average, those round times are still gently climbing a little bit through the day. And that tells me that our tee times are not in balance with our cycle times. If we had have made a little tweak in this particular golf course, it was a 30-second increase in the tee time interval. Well, now look what happens. Our round times are around 4.5 hours. So we've gone from a peak of 5 hours and 50 minutes to a peak of 4 hours and 35 minutes. We haven't had to change the behavior of 38 groups of golfers. We've had to change the behavior of 8, and we've had to make a subtle tweak to our tee time. Now this is a pretty dramatic example, but it's an anecdote that goes to the heart of the data that we're seeing all around the country, and the mathematical model that tells us what pace is all about. Now I asked I happen to know the golf professional at this club, and he was adamant that they were on a 10-minute tee time. Well, when I look at the data, I could see that they were actually teeing off every 9 minutes and 15 seconds. And I said, well, how can that be? You told me it was 10 minutes, but I'm seeing 9 minutes and 15 seconds here. He said, well, the starter has a little bit of leeway. Well, if the starter has a leeway, then we're not controlling our tee times. And it's critical that we control our tee times. You can't just send golfers out when the fairway is clear. If your golf course needs a 10-minute or a 9-minute tee interval to effectively control pace, then you have to control it. We go back to my wife's chemical plants. You have to measure and you have to control it. And so that's our fourth recommendation of the day, is that you have to balance, those tee times have to realistically balance what golfers can achieve on your golf course, and then you have to actually implement them. Now, I've talked about cycle time, but I've not actually told you, except for a little bit, how one goes about measuring it. One of the most effective ways, what cycle time is a flow rate. It's how quickly are golfers flowing through your golf course. You could measure it anywhere. You could measure it on a tee, you could measure it in the landing zone. But one really nice way to measure it is to take a look at when the flagstick goes in the hole, because that's very definitive. And every hole might have 5 sets of tees, but it's got one hole. It's got one flagstick. And so when the group in front of you puts that flag in the hole, you start your stopwatch. When your group puts the flag in the hole, you stop the stopwatch. That's your cycle time. And I like to think about it as our shot clock. That's golf's shot clock. If we can effectively control that time, then we're going to have much more control over our pace. And if we can start to educate ourselves and golfers about what our shot clock is, this flagstick to flagstick time, I think we're going to end up with a much more effective pace of play policy out there. And again, I mentioned that flagstick to flagstick time is exactly the same timing that is done at the checkpoint system, at our amateur championships and many amateur championships around the world. And very notably, it's the policy that the AJGA uses, who are notorious for very good pace. They are measuring in that checkpoint system precisely the things that they need to measure to ensure an effective pace of play policy. And we can do that on our own golf courses. I've been working to try to convince the major golf cart companies that they shouldn't be just putting out there, you're 15 minutes behind our pace of play policy for the day, but rather telling us, where are we in relation to the group in front of us? What's our cycle time? And is it over where we need to be? Are we on time? Are we making improvements? So we're working very hard to try to bring that system to the real world in a quick way through the golf cart GPS companies. The other thing that we're doing is investing money and time in an inexpensive system that every other golf course that can't afford something like a cart-based GPS system could put on their golf course. That doesn't require doesn't require any input from the golfer. They just play the normal game, and we get feedback back to the pro shop to tell us where are the golfers on the golf course, what are their cycle times. And lastly, our seventh recommendation is that we continue to do this work, to work with our partners in golf, including you guys, to try to continue to come up with an understanding of what are the influences on cycle time and lead group time. And I'm very happy to talk about a program that we're introducing with help from our partners at Chevron, and that your organization is going to be hosting this year. And it's a program of 8 interns that are going to be spread around the country. And those 8 interns are going to go to golf courses every day for a summer with little GPS devices. They're about the size of a memory stick or a pack of Trident gum. And all we do is we ask golfers, could you stick this in your pocket and play the round of golf? It doesn't require any input. We don't put a name to them. It's not feeding live data to the NSA. It's simply collecting where they are on the golf course every 5 seconds. And we bring that back, and we couple that data with not only how you moved, but how everyone else in your group interacted, how your group interacted with the group in front of you and behind you. And we can collect that data along with what was the cart rules for the day? What was the stimp of the greens? What was the height of cut of the rough? What tees did you play from? Did you tee it forward or not? What's your handicap? All these factors. What's the weather? What's the slope and rating of the golf course? What's the individual power and length of the holes? What's the square footage of the green? All the factors that we think may influence the cycle times and the lead group times, we're collecting all that. And so then by this time next year, we will have a definitive understanding of the role that all these factors play on cycle times and lead group times. And at the same time, as a sort of a reward for participating, if your golf course decides that they would like to participate in this, we're going to kick you back a report within a couple weeks of doing the study to give you our feedback and our measurements on what were your cycle times, what were your actual cycle times for the day, what were your actual tee times for the day, what were your bottleneck holes, what would your golf course, what would your rounds on your golf course look like if you tried 8-minute, 9-minute, 10-minute tee times, so on and so forth. And so we're really excited about this project because it's certainly the most exhaustive and extensive research program that's ever been conducted on pace in the history of the game. The interns are going to be situated in a bunch of different agronomic regions around the country, including right here in Kenilworth. I think are we in Kenilworth in this building? Mm-hmm. Okay. And you can see a bunch of other state regionals around the country. And so what this data is going to collect is not only is it going to be used toward pace of play, but it's also going to be used toward updating our handicapping manual, our course rating and handicapping manual. It could potentially feed into equipment standards department and our equipment regulation. And Jim Moore is going to show in a minute, Jim Moore is going to show us how this feeds into potentially into improving construction and maintenance practices in golf. So there's a whole bunch of factors that are going into this research, and we're, as I said, we're quite excited about it. So if you want, if your golf course wants to participate in this, and it's really very simple, our intern will show up in the morning, they'll hand out the GPS loggers, and they'll collect them on the 18th green, and that's about all the involvement you need to do. You can just give us an email at gps@usga.org, and we'll be definitely happy to set something up this summer.